Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the top there, I'm continuing my trek through the Undertaker's matches at Wrestlemania. We are nearing the end of this ride that began, as I'm recording this, over 8 years ago. And with this one, we come to the match that for a while I thought was going to be his last ride, both at Mania and in general. And of course, part of the reason for that, even in retrospect, is this was the Undertaker's last full normal match at WrestleMania, and it was the one with how it ended. It looked like it was going to be the end one. It is also what led to me starting this series. This, of course, is his match at WrestleMania 33 against Roman Reigns. So, and his second loss at Mania. Now, as I've mentioned multiple times before in the lead up to this one, this is the match that, if you were not going to have him lose the first time to the new face of Fear and held off on him losing to Lesnar instead of calling the audible like they did, this would have made the most sense. Most of this is looking at it in retrospect, for him to lose it out of any of them. Especially in the year since, Roman Reigns going on to have that monster heel run, that title reign, and even some of the stuff he's doing in the few appearances he's made since losing the title. This would have made the most sense right here. But we all know that didn't happen. And looking at the match again, the match is a little bit better than what I thought it was, but we'll get into that further into it. This match, like I said, was WrestleMania 33, took place on April 2nd, 2017 in Orlando, Florida, at the Camping World Stadium in front of over 64,000 fans, almost 65,000 fans, because it was like in the 100 range there, so a good sized crowd. And they did make themselves known a lot during the match and after the end of the match. Now, the build up for this match, I don't really remember, so the video at the beginning that kind of sums it up definitely was a good thing to remind me. It goes back to the Royal Rumble before this, where Taker was eliminated by Roman, and of course in the stare down following it, Roman was like, "This is my yard now." Of course, which claim Taker has always made, this is his yard. And on the March 6th episode of Raw, Taker attacked Reigns with a choke slam, and the match went from there. It's a very thin build, especially since, unlike when there was a Royal Rumble moment between him and Shawn, there wasn't a lot of past history. But it is enough to get the match going, especially since at this point in his career, Taker's just there for Mania and some other build stuff, unless he has a personal issue like his previous series with Brock Lesnar, where we kept getting the shots of him getting kicked below the ball, kicked in the ball, not below. And of course, perfect meme usage for that DBZ abridged line, "He keeps kicking me in the dick. Why does he keep kicking me in the dick?" I'll just say lucky for Roman that Taker didn't try to do all that. Now, this is in the era of Mania where the pay-per-views were very long. And that is even without factoring in the pre-show. Because without the pre-show, this pay-per-view, watching it on Peacock, 5 hours long. Way over long. Thankfully, that's one good thing about splitting it into 2 days, I guess, is that you can probably cut an hour or so without the pre-show and then try and get everyone out, even though I think out of all the pay-per-views, only Mania really deserves to be that, but it is what it is when it comes to them adding it to SummerSlam and then probably Royal Rumble coming up. Now, to add on to this, counting the entrances of that last hour, about 45 minutes of it was this match. Think about that. The hype package, the entrances, and the match itself and the post-match took up a majority of the last hour of the show. Now, I'd say that's pretty good because they're really devoting time to the main event. But if there is an issue, it is the time. Now, the match itself is only 23 minutes, which is shorter than I remember, because I remember the match being longer, but it's probably all that extra time around it. I would think, just from an in-ring perspective, maybe they cut off 3 minutes from the actual match, because the first little bit of the match, hit or miss. We'll get to it. Now, the entrances for these two is what you would expect from these two at this time. Roman's no longer doing the coming through the crowd. He comes down the aisle. You know, this is the Roman Empire era of him. Comes out, Taker comes out. It's a typical Undertaker entrance, especially post-streak ending. Now, the thing that really makes this match is the fact that you have good old JR on the call. I actually forgot he came out to call this match. He's on the call with Cole and with JBL. And with Jim Ross on there, he adds that a little bit more, that little bit of gravitas to the match. It's like, ooh, the chef's kiss. And of course, JBL and Cole also know Undertaker very well. I mean, JBL's been in the ring with him, as he said in the last Mania match, I believe. And of course, Cole's called a lot of his matches over the years. So it's three people that at different times and in different twists and turns throughout the career have been there for Undertaker. So having them on the call for this, perfect way to do it. And it's probably why I'm looking at it. It kind of would have been fitting if this was his last match. And just a little added thing. If they weren't going to have this be where the streak ended in retrospect, they should have added a little caveat that if Taker lost, he would retire. So it would add a little bit more drama, kind of like Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair, even though Flair kind of ruined that with his TNA career, and of course, you know, the last match thing where he almost died in the ring because of his freaking pacemaker. But, you know, that's a whole other topic. Anyway, this match is no holds barred, so the two have a little bit more leeway to do stuff in and around the ring. You know, once the match gets going, at one point, Taker throws Reigns into one of the steel steps. He does a choke slam onto the announce table, and you know, the typical around the announce table little shenanigans. And then he gets a spear through the announce table. Of course, Taker gets a near fall with a last ride. And once they get in the ring, Reigns does 2 Superman punches on Taker, and then he gets attacked with a chair. So most of the beginning match is kind of what you would expect from these two in this type of thing, only since this is in the no blood era, even with these two in there, you know Vince is probably going to have an aneurysm if that happens, unless it's hard way. So even though this is no holds barred and we are seeing stuff, it doesn't really feel like the no holds barred stipulation is really adding up to it. So if anything, they probably should have just had a normal match and then just cut back on a little bit of the other stuff, other than maybe the ref getting in there and then having a little bit of restraint because he doesn't want to do a count out at Mania with these two people involved. So being very conservative with the timing of his calls. No, that's just what I'm thinking on it. It's only once Taker gets to the tombstone that the match, I feel, kind of kicks into its second gear. I say kind of because it doesn't fully. And part of the reason for that is that, and this is, Taker has admitted this, Taker was not in the best in-ring shape. And watching again, that's something I noticed. Even going from his previous 2 matches to this one, you can tell that he's a little bit thicker in certain areas. Like his chest is a little bit heavier, around the waist is a little bit heavier. And I'm happy that later years he did admit that was his own fault. That I guess maybe he didn't get into as a good ring shape he thought he did, or he thought he was in good shape. And like, oh yeah, I'll be able to go out there. And then he's like, oh yeah, that was the drizzle and shits. But the other thing is that there are parts in the match, it's mostly in the end game, where Reigns does not do as much a good job selling stuff in the ring. I don't mean like selling the physical stuff, it's more his body language and all that when it comes to how he's reacting off Taker. Now I'll say there are parts of it that are better than I remember. Like there was one look on his face near the very end, I'm like, oh, that was actually a good look. But there's like some moments where he should have been yelling louder, like, stay down, don't make me do this, mainly near the end, to kind of sell it out of respect, because this is a man who has been in and around the wrestling business since he was knee high. His dad, his uncles, other relations, and extended family. So he has a very good amount of respect for this business and for what Taker represents in that business. So it would make sense that if just from that respect that he'd be yelling, don't make me do this. And then maybe at the end, like, show a little bit of frustration from the fact he had to do it, even though he went into this match knowing this was his yard, but just a little bit of that. And then have it segue out. But that's just me thinking about it. Of course, if I was in Reigns' spot, that's how I would have sold it, but it's neither here nor there. Now, as I was saying, Taker does do a tombstone for a near fall. And once again, we get the Taker reaction. Thankfully, the camera does not sell it as much as the last time they did this to him. Like, why are you surprised? And at this point, I'm glad the surprise doesn't last as long, because it's still like, Taker, why are you surprised at this point in your career that someone kicks out of the tombstone? As Family Guy Spider-Man said, everybody gets one. That's correct. Everybody gets at least one kick out of a tombstone at this point. Now Taker goes for another one, and of course Reigns counters into another Superman punch for a near fall, because I think just about everybody and their mother kicks out of the Superman punch at this point. And that's why I'm glad the spear is more used as his actual finishing maneuver. And of course, Taker counters that into a Hell's Gate, but Reigns manages to escape, because at this point the Hell's Gate is not really worth the paper its name is printed on, sadly. I mean, it went from a move that was devastating to was making Big Daddy V cough of blood to this. But at least it's a good move for Taker to break out into a counter arsenal. Taker at one point does attempt his signature sit up, but he collapses, so that's a nice little bit of selling there. And this is where I feel Reigns does some good job with his body language and all that stuff, but this is where I think he could have added that other little bit that I brought up earlier. And where I get that one facial reaction. And one little thing I like about it is that there's a nice little tip of the hat thing with his movement when he goes to do the spear that ends the match, and that is that he does off the rope, off the rope, off the rope, and then boom. So it's like a more momentum spear that finally puts Taker down. That's where I feel like after the spear, he should have been like a brief moment of hesitation, or like done a little weird thing when he covered him, and you can see that he's hating it. Then after the 3 count, like him hit the mat once in frustration before he gets up and then looks down at Taker, like the realization crossing his mind, and then whatever the body language he had there, where he slowly left the ring to leave it to Taker, go down the aisle looking up at him, and then do the arms up he did before the pyro goes off. That's just me thinking about it. I had some of those thoughts when this match first happened, and it's something that I still have now. It doesn't kill the last half of the match entirely for me, but it's one of those things that, like, yeah. If this had, let's say if this match had happened later on in Reigns' career when he was a heel, granted his body language dynamic in this part would have been different, but I can imagine he would have sold this part a little bit better. And the crowd, their reaction definitely makes it seem like this would have been the end of Taker's in-ring career, and it would have gone on at least another 3 years. And this is where the hashtag Thank You Taker thing came from. You know, they're really selling it. Now, unlike when he lost to Lesnar, there's not really a lot of big shots of the crowd like it was there. I think mainly because that was the shock of it, so we don't get any memes like. Now, if this had been when the streak ended, we probably would have. And there probably would have been some surprise, but not a lot. There probably would have been some pissed off people, but I think in retrospect, some of those people would have been like, yeah, this is for the best when it comes to ending the streak. Now, when Taker manages to get back up, you know, he's letting it come in, and his family, his wife and his children are in the front row. He slowly takes off his gloves, lays them down, takes off his jacket, takes off his hat, puts him in the ring, and then walks down the aisle one last time. And that little shot of the Undertaker's gear in the ring, that would have been the perfect send-off for him as an in-ring performer. Now, of course, as I said, it didn't happen because he had technically 2 more matches at WrestleMania. But remember, one of them is a glorified squash match, and the other was a cinematic match. So, even with those 2 in mind, for this being his last traditional match at WrestleMania, that is the perfect way for him to go out on it, with that little thing. Now, overall, if the match could have been better in ring-wise, but this is a match that is decent more for what it means to his career and history than for a lot of the stuff in ring. And I believe it was JBL at one point in the commentary post-match that says this is going to be the biggest win of Reigns' career. Definitely one of them. I'd say in retrospect, probably him holding both of the world titles at one point is probably the biggest one of his career, especially since he was a proper heel at that point instead of just being a face that the fans turned on. And of course, by that point, Vince and then segueing into Triple H were actually booking him as a character better. Because this is the part where Reigns in his career, you could definitely tell that Vince was fighting against the fan reaction. I mean, the whole Roman Empire thing. I never really had a big problem with Reigns a lot during this era, initially. Like, I had little issues like with him saying suffering succotash. And I didn't have a problem with him winning the world titles, but it's more how Vince would book him in the ring and then some of his story stuff after the fact, where you could definitely tell they were trying to make a new Cena with a little bit of Hulk Hogan sprinkled on top, instead of just letting it naturally go. I think that's the big difference between Triple H and Vince as a booker, is that Triple H is more apt to listen to the people instead of Vince, because Vince is very stubborn. But I don't know, the whole thing about Roman Reigns, that could be a rant for another day. That's really all there is to say about this match, and all the thoughts about the post and all that. So next time we will be getting to his match at Mania against John Cena, a match that I think should have actually been a more traditional match, but we'll be hearing my thoughts on the build and what we actually got. Till then, everybody.